Welcome to the Trader, a Spotify Top 10 Traitors podcast. My name is Matthew. I'm a writer working in unscripted TV development, and I am a 100% faithful fan of the multi-award winning hit TV competition series, The Traitors. This podcast features deep dives into every episode of the show, as well as interviews with contestants. And this season of the podcast is dedicated to season 2 of The Traitors US. Today, my guest co host and I will be looking at episode 8. And that co host is not David Bloomberg. David has had enough of Peter and needed a break for a week. So someone else is stepping in. Before we meet them, it's time for some Traitors updates in an overdue TT News segment. Good news for US listeners. The Traitors UK Season 2, or Series 2, as I would say, will be available to stream on Peacock in the States from March the 8th. Not only that, but the Traitors Australia Season 2 and the Traitors New Zealand will then be available to stream on Peacock from March 28th. And as well as all that content, you will also, of course, be able to listen along to the Trader for a running commentary, inside info, and contestant interviews. Unfortunately, although I covered UK Series 2 and Australia 2, I don't have a whole podcast season on New Zealand, but I do have a single, pretty long episode covering the entire season all in one go. And one of the finalists from New Zealand has appeared as a co host on a Traitors Canada recap episode here on the podcast. So, all in all, plenty of content from the Trader to feed your Traitors appetite over in the US. More US based news, although slightly more regional, perhaps. If you happen to live near New York, Traitors host Alan Cumming himself will be hosting a watch party and conversation with Catherine Cohen all about the Traitors on February 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, obviously, at the 92nd Street Y. Their website reads, enjoy a screening of the latest episode on the big screen, then get the lowdown on the killer all-celebrity cast, the diabolical twists and turns, stories from behind the scenes, and more. February 26th is a Monday, so I'm assuming they'll be discussing episode 9 from the previous Thursday, unless they are having a special preview of episode 10. This is a charity event, and tickets cost $25. However, the website booking form suggests you can also buy what they are calling an online program ticket, implying it will be live streamed. I am happy to test this out as a guinea pig and watch from here in the UK. The website also tells us about what the ticket price covers, saying, as a non-profit community and cultural centre, the 92nd Street Y, New York, relies on support from people like you. Your donation helps us continue connecting you to the programs you love, no matter where in the world you are. I'll post the link to tickets in the episode description, and if anyone would like to be a Trader correspondent at the event in person, please get in touch. I might even buy you a ticket. It's time to meet my co-host for today's episode, and not just any co-host, but a returning co-host. I am joined again by Stephen Ripley. Stephen is a writer who lives in Seattle. His latest play, written with his writing partner Matthew Abergel, good first name and surname, is Queer Spirits, an anthology of queer myths, legends, and sacred tales from around the world. Stephen enjoys yoga, qigong, dance, reading, cooking, nature walks, movies, hockey, and theatre. That is more than all of my interests ever. And The Traitors is one of his favourite TV shows, of course. Stephen, welcome back to The Trader. How you doing?
I'm good, Matthew. I'm doing real well. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Very excited to have you back to talk about The Traitors again. We always have really good talks about what we've seen. Are you enjoying this season so far?
I'm really enjoying the season. It's very unique. I think it's unique because, well, I was actually thinking of what David was saying on the podcast when he was comparing the season to a film called The Warriors
Yeah.
that he mentioned. I've seen that film. I remember incredibly seeing it when it first came out in theaters. But it's about gangs in New York City, and the real sort of unique part of this season of the Traitors is you've got these sort of different gangs that have developed, and that creates a whole different dynamic on the show that's super cool and interesting and fun.
Yeah. And I think you've also been keeping up to date with some international seasons too. So, have you watched the recent UK season, I'm sure?
I have, yes,
Okay.
which was fantastic.
Yes, I agree. And so,
I Yeah, the UK version of the show is my favorite version of the Traitors. Period.
yeah, on camera. If you could see me, I'm like shaking my fists with happiness. Shaking my fists. That sounds too angry. I'm rejoicing. Uh, Are you saying then, Stephen, that really US listeners should definitely watch that UK season on Peacock and then listen to all my episodes of the podcast?
That is exactly what I'm saying.
I knew that's what you were getting at. Thank you. Now, it's time for us to set up our own game of betrayal and deception before we talk about episode 8 of Traitors US. This is the Trader Traitor. Our not so secret mission from here on in is to tell one lie to one another. The lie has to be a fabrication or a made up fact, big or small, about the traitors or about ourselves or anything else at all. For example, I could lie to Stephen and say that last week's episode of The Traitors US had the worst viewing figures so far because they didn't use a round table. By the way, that may very well not be a lie. I just made that up, but wouldn't be surprised. However, I couldn't lie and say that I really liked Alan's outfits in this episode when the actual truth is not the case, and I'll come back to that later. That would be a fake opinion. So we're looking for fake facts rather than fake thoughts and feelings. Stephen, we have betrayed each other in the past. Are you ready to betray me again?
I am ready to betray you again. And I also have notes about Alan's outfits in this episode.
Okay.
So it will be amusing when we get to that point.
Wonder if they're the same. In that
It may be.
case, I think we are ready to betray one another and detect one another's lies. Hopefully, we shall see. And our game begins now, which means we're ready to go ahead and talk all about episode 8 of the Traitors US season 2. We start with a recap of the previous episode and we're reminded of some important things. So, remember, Peter refused seduction, which is quite ironic for someone who was the Bachelor, and confused both the traitors and probably every human being watching the show. We had a torchy fire ceremony instead of a round table, which I don't think anyone really cared for. And it meant that 7 people were protected from murder and 4 people were at risk. And those were Kate, Bergie, MG, and Trishelle. And it's on record that my prediction at the end of the last podcast episode was that Trishelle would be murdered. And now, Stephen, you could completely lie here. Who did you think that they would go for to murder?
So let's see. Remind me again who were all of the people who were
It,
protected or
the
not protected?
Yeah, the people it could have been were Kate, Bergie, MJ, and Trishelle, and I was convinced they would just go for Trishelle.
It was for me. I sensed that they were on the fence between Trishelle and Bergie, and I think it could have gone either way. And honestly, I think either choice was a good choice.
Okay, yeah.
You know,
And so in this episode, we are about to find out what they decided then. So we start at breakfast. CT and Sheree arrive first, and CT reminds us that Trishelle was very upset with him last time because he didn't save her at the fire ceremony. Sheree thinks that either Bergie or Trishelle will go, just like you said, Stephen. Phaedra arrives in what I feel is her best outfit yet. She has a beret, a tartan tie, a little sparkly brooch. She's got this cool green coat on. I think it's just really cool. Kevin, by the way, Kevin arrives and he can't say Parvati's name. He keeps saying poverty, like he can't pronounce it properly. I've seen a few people do this. It's very strange they've reached episode 8 and she hasn't like corrected people and be like, that's not my name. he
It's
says that
probably because she's been suspected as a traitor from the very beginning, and she's like, "That's the least of my worries."
that's true. Yeah, she's just like, I don't call me whatever you want, just don't call me a traitor. So Kevin, he wants to see Parvati arrive because he thinks, well, that'll sort of affirm my suspicion that she's a traitor. He's saying if she doesn't show up and she's been murdered, I will be shocked.
Yeah,
Kate and MG then enter, so we know it is in fact down to either Bergie or Trishelle, or technically Parvati, but we know that's not going to happen. But also the players just sort of seem to have universally accepted that she is a traitor as well. Like they are not really wondering if she's going to show up. It's like they've just agreed among themselves. Yeah, she's a traitor, right?
yeah.
And
There's no suspense with her any longer. Um, there's no
yeah,
even. I mean, everything that happens with her during the day is weirdly not well. We'll see what happens, but it's not what you expect because everybody knows she's a traitor. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. It's strange how it's worked. Like I feel like this doesn't really happen that much in the traitors. Like people always have their suspicions, and sometimes one or two people are dead set on someone. But this really is a case where it's the entire group of players they just sort of accept, oh, she's obviously a traitor, and yeah, like you said, there's not really that much suspense about it as we go on. And then Parvati does arrive through the door, followed by Trishelle. So I was completely shocked. I gasped watching this. Bergie is gone. I flew in the face of my prediction from last week, and we get our little flashback. We see the traitors talking about Bergie. They think that killing him is the next best thing to getting rid of Peter. Of course, they couldn't get rid of Peter, he was protected. Presumably because Bergie and Peter are really close. He's kind of Peter's sidekick. He'll do whatever Peter wants, so they have to kill
Yeah, in the post-mortem show, they refer to him as Peter's lieutenant.
him.
And so if they can't get the captain, lieutenant is the next best thing.
Yeah,
That was basically their reasoning.
yeah, which is it makes sense. It's a good plan. And we actually see Bergie getting his letter telling him he's been murdered. He says he thinks he was murdered because he can't be manipulated. And he says, he played the best game he could, which wasn't really that successful because he's gone now. Um, I I kind of have a thought here though. He seems quite proud. He's saying I can be manipulated as if he's quite happy about that. But I thought, well, that's a bad thing. I don't think you want to appear like that. You probably should play the game and try and appear quite amenable and quite pliable. Like, doesn't that make more sense than
It
showing
does.
everyone?
It does. I had the note that I had was I'm not sure that based on what he said at that moment, I'm not sure that he understood what was happening with the numbers game and the two gangs.
Yeah,
That I'm not even. It wasn't clear to me that. I mean, to me, that's so clearly why why he was murdered was because they're trying to get the Peter pals down in number
yeah,
so that the Bravo girls, as they call themselves at another point, can have more dominance in the house. And I didn't get the sense that he understood any of that. Maybe he does, but he wasn't revealing it.
yeah. I would agree with that too. And I even think Peter also doesn't understand the ramifications of how he's behaving, but we'll definitely get to that. So we're back at breakfast. John raises a toast to pay respects as if Bergie is actually dead, and Peter says that vengeance is coursing through his veins because Bergie is gone.
And there's a very hilarious moment now. This is classic. Phaedra while everybody's sort of yakking about the murder, she's like, I want some cream cheese and jam. And she's looking around, smacking her lips. She's so funny. She loves her food.
She does, which also well, does kind of come back around to bite her. So
It does.
she needs to be careful about how she's behaving at breakfast.
At least she didn't spill her coffee on someone like CP did when
Yes.
he walks in and immediately spilled his coffee all over Sheree.
Yeah. Uh,
He was so classy about it.
Trishelle is speaking in her one of her mivs, her interviews. She says straight up she knows Phaedra is a traitor. We've seen her say this before, but she's really gunning for her now. She says everyone is too busy looking at the obvious, which is Parvati, but she is convinced that Phaedra is the way to go. Alan appears at breakfast, and right here's I'll say this controversial thing, right? I know Alan's styling is very fun and flamboyant, and sometimes I really enjoy it, and I think, oh, that's really I like that they've made him this very over the top character. But I also think, especially in this episode, they kind of just make him look like a really old man. Like he's not particularly old. Like they make him look like he's 90. Like usually Alan Cumming's pretty cool, and I've seen him do a cabaret show in real life from a distance. And recently he was on the Graham Norton show here in the UK doing an interview. And like, yeah, he's quite funky. But sometimes I think when they overload him with tartan and hats, I'm like, you've made him look like an old professor at Hogwarts. Like he's not that old.
Yep. The note I wrote down is Alan looks like Mother Courage,
Yeah.
especially when he takes his little, whatever that is, that blanket, and he puts it over his head. I was like, this just is not the look for you, Alan. It's not the look.
Yeah.
I mean, he
So
looked comfortable.
he did. He looked when they were out in the woods and he had his shawl on. He did look very
Yes.
cozy, but also about 100 years old.
Yes.
So I'm glad we're in agreement. Alan then, but still a fan, like Alan very much.
Yeah.
Alan then takes down Bergie's picture and destroys it on the floor before alluding to his holiday home where he has a guest staying. Kate immediately remembers the cabin from her season one, and the viewers as well will probably remember, especially if you've watched Traitors UK, you probably know what's coming. It's time for some discussions around the house then. Trishelle, again, she wants Phaedra out. That's her motivation for the entire episode now. And her reasoning is that Parvati is the obvious choice and that everyone will already be going for her tonight at round table. So she wants to go for Phaedra instead. Having watched the whole episode, I'm still not totally understanding her thinking. She keeps saying things like, "Oh, if we don't get Phaedra out, she'll make it all the way to the end." I don't really follow why she's so desperate to get Phaedra out now. What are your thoughts on it, Stephen?
I think my understanding of Trishelle's reasoning was that she wants, because Parvati is, as we've said, everyone knows she's a traitor. And she's on borrowed time, and they can get rid of her in the next episode. Whereas I think Trishelle wants to go after Phaedra because she's so trusted and in with this. I'm using the term Bravo girls
Mm,
because in the postmortem, that's what Kate calls them. She says, "Yeah, the Bravo girls are in a good shape now,"
yeah,
um, because Phaedra is really in with them and she's protected by them. And if she is indeed a traitor, she is fooling them. And it could be Trishelle's trying to be like sort of a good faithful in the sense that she wants to get somebody out who she perceives could make it all the way to the end and fool people and have it be another Cerise situation. And I think that's what her reasoning is.
yeah. Okay, I guess so. I
Yeah.
guess there are only 4 episodes left beyond this. So yeah, maybe she is like, I don't really need to try to get Parvati out, but yeah, like I might be murdered tonight, so as long as I'm here, I'll go for the person that is less. obvious, and then I'll look like a really great faithful. Okay, sure.
Yep. And, to be fair, also, she's not making the mistake that a certain UK player made recently by waiting too long.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
you have that kind of suspicion, if you wait too long, it could be too late, as we saw.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So Trishelle then talks to Peter in the armory, and she brings up her reason. She says, "Look, Dan, before he was banished, Dan suddenly threw out Phaedra's name. Isn't that strange? I think it's because Phaedra is a traitor." She also says that Phaedra never looks nervous. She's always just too sort of calm and laid back. And again, you talked about her at breakfast. Kevin then arrives, and Trishelle tells him about her thoughts on Phaedra too. And Trishelle seems to be, she seems like she's actually talking Peter around. Like he's starting to kind of understand her thinking. She says, again, Parvati, she compares Parvati to a wounded bird, which I think someone else used maybe in another episode. And they think, well, she'll sort of do whatever she can right now. So why don't we get her on side and turn her against Phaedra? And she even says, if I get murdered, fuck it. And I'm like, that's not a good strategy. You don't want you don't just like allow yourself to be murdered. Be careful. Uh, we also get some exterior shots of pouring rain in Scotland, and I think that's more like it. Like that's the real Scotland. I feel like I'm genuinely watching my home on screen now. All these sunny, bright, lovely shots. That's like the 3 good days of the year. So the rain is far more apt.
it's very familiar to me as well because we're basically on the same, I guess it's latitude,
Sure.
and Seattle is very much like Scotland. So it's like, rainy day. That's just a day that ends in Y.
Exactly. Peter then decides to talk to Parvati alone. He says he's like trying to establish where things went wrong for them, and he says our relationship deteriorated when she told other people his secret, and I think he means the fake shield story, like when he pretended he had a shield. But I actually couldn't really follow what he wasn't more specific than that.
I couldn't follow that conversation. It
Yeah,
was all a tissue of lies anyway, in both directions. So
yeah.
I was like, yeah, they're just garbling at one another at this point.
Yeah, truly. Like she doesn't trust him. He doesn't trust her. They're both pretending that they want to trust each other. The whole time MJ's outside the door listening, and Parvati's saying like, I've been a target because I aligned myself with Dan and I shouldn't have, and that was a mistake." Um, I think Peter's playing a risky game because they're not equals. Like he knows she's a traitor and she knows he's faithful. So him like trying to get on side with her, I think she can murder you whenever she wants, unless you've got a shield or something. You can't murder her. So I just think it's so dangerous to try not to side with a traitor. I think that's a good plan, but to have called out someone like he clearly thinks she's a traitor, and he's now trying to pretend that he maybe doesn't think that. I just think you've Peter, you've picked well, as it turns out in the end, it doesn't matter. But I don't know. I don't I don't know what Peter's doing. I think Peter is just making things up as he goes along, thinks he's
I
got it all
agree.
figured out, and then goes, "Oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. I'm gonna have to do something else now."
I agree. And this is the second time that he's come to Parvati and said, let's make a deal. We can work together. He did it a few episodes ago, I
Yeah.
can't remember when, but it's like really just, I can't understand what he's doing or how he thinks this is going to help. And guess what? It doesn't help. You know, by the end of this episode, everybody's like, looking, doing this with Peter,
Yeah.
looking, and um, yeah, it's just, plus the whole conversation he has now with Parvati, it reminded me of that episode of Friends where everyone finds out, where it's, I know that you know that I know that, I know that you know. It's just like, oh my dear.
Yeah, very much so. And you're right. And we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I don't know. Might as well say it now. People listening have seen the whole episode. Yeah, by the end of this, you're right. Peter. it suddenly has lots of eyes on him and people questioning him. And I think, what a fall from. Now, I don't think he was ever playing an amazing game, but everyone just assumed it's like the opposite of Parvati. Everyone just assumed, oh, he is clearly a faithful. We all trust him. And now it's just all crumbled because of how he's behaving and changing his opinions or pretending to change his opinions. So it's fascinating how it's all turning out for Peter.
Yes. I'll just quote another line that Kate delivers in the postmortem, I think. She says, Peter is being a traitor to the faithfuls.
Yeah,
So he's not saying that she thinks he's a traitor, but that he's not acting in a way that is conducive to the faithfuls winning this game.
yeah.
And that's what's happening.
They speak in the kitchen very near the end of the episode, and she says basically something like that. Yeah. So, because MG has been listening to Peter and Parvati talk, she goes and tells some others about this. She finds it very suspicious, and they all agree that Parvati is just doing the rounds to save herself. She's going around and speaking to everybody and trying to get them to not vote for her tonight. Meanwhile, John asks Phaedra who she thinks is a traitor apart from Parvati, and she says Peter. She says he's acting too crazy and erratic. I don't really think John's the right person to say this to because he really loves Peter, but again, we'll see how things go. Peter then breaks his Phaedra plan to Parvati. He practically says to her, you probably still are a traitor, but you want to get Phaedra out first. And of course, she's like, okay. So it's just a very strange web of lies and non lies and pretend acting and all sorts of things.
After everything he did, when he said that, I thought that's where you should have started and just left it. Do you want to save your ass?
Yeah. We see a little bit in the cars on the way to the mission for today. Trishelle reaffirms to Parvati that she says, maybe you're not a traitor. Actually, I've got more reasons to believe it's Phaedra. And so at this point in the episode, I couldn't see where it was going. I thought, oh, maybe Phaedra's going tonight. Maybe that's where this is all going. And of course, it does end up being very, very close. We arrive then at our mission. It's the creepy cabin, and the players start to guess who is this mysterious guest that Alan has referenced. And we see some mysterious shots of a figure, their foot, their foots, their feet. Wow, I forgot the plural for the word foot. We see their feet, and we then find out it's Dr. Will. I have no idea who this man is, but we hear from Trishelle that he's the most devious Big Brother player ever. And David on the podcast, David Bloomberg, had mentioned him a few episodes ago. Actually, at the time, I thought David was lying. I thought David had invented Dr. Will, and that was his lie for the Trader Traitor. But no, he's a real person. Stephen, what do you know about Dr. Will?
I know about Dr. Will is that he was on Big Brother and professionally he is a dermatologist.
Okay.
And that's pretty much all I know. On the episode, what confused me is that he was wearing a deerstalker hat and a cape, and he kind of looked like he was playing the role of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, yeah.
And but it didn't make any sense, so I was like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah.
But I like the creepy cabin, especially the rocking chair that rocks by itself, which is like the rocking chair in that television show Lost when they find the creepy cabin in the woods. Um,
Yeah.
so that was a good touch, creepy cabin.
Yeah, it's quite like Lost in a way. Yeah, I love that show. Um, I also there's lots of things about Dr. Will's appearance here that makes no sense to me. And I have spoken to David Bloomberg offline, and I think David is also just thinks it was a total waste of time. I'm sure he will talk more about it when he is back next week. Uh, I'm sidetracking a bit here. I'm going off on a tangent, but I just don't really care for this. Like, let's bring in a random Big Brother person for an episode because, and this is a major difference between US traitors and UK traitors. That I think a lot of viewers over here, where I am in the UK, just can't get on board with. Like, if you don't really know these reality stars, and I don't know most of these people, in fact, the one or two that I did know are now gone. You're kind of already a step behind. It's like there's not as much of a reason to invest in them. Whereas and this is like a big, broader, more general conversation about having celebrities on the show at all. I think it's just difficult to really care about. I don't care about these celebrities winning hundreds of thousands of dollars. I care about people who are not celebrities winning money and maybe changing their lives. And so I don't. I'm like, why is this man called Doctor Will here? This means nothing for me. So he introduces the challenge, and you've now answered my question, Stephen, because I wondered, is Doctor Will even his real name? But you've done your research more than I did. He is a doctor. Okay. I thought it was like a Doctor Doom, Doctor like a cartoon, like superhero name or something. Um, so
My guess is that Dr. Will, quote, Dr. Will, unquote, might be his nickname on Big Brother. Maybe that's what they called him.
yeah,
Uh, that's a guess.
yeah.
David can
I,
confirm it.
I probably that's how David referred to him before he was on this. So sure, must be.
Yeah. Plus, he's kind of like he has a big like. Apparently, he has a lot of YouTube videos, and he has kind of an online personality. So he's doing that whole like thing that some doctors do, where it's like, "I'm Doctor Will," you know. So
Yeah, yeah,
more
sure.
familiar, I guess.
Yeah. He shows them into the cabin then and locks the door in this like devious, villainous manner that I I'm just I can't take it. I'm too British for this. Like Claudia Winkleman doesn't do this. So it's just a wee bit too silly for me. And anyway, the players begin searching. They find a map on the table. Someone says, "Did anyone see the key?" It's literally on the table in the center. And they figure out that there is a tunnel system underneath the cabin. Kate says she's really into radios. She's like, "I'll do the radios." I'm assuming it's because she's on below deck and they use radios a lot.
Yes,
That's my guess.
exactly.
So she wants to stay in the cabin and guide the people in the tunnels from there. They figure out someone has to hold down two switches for the lights, but the lights can only be on in the tunnel or the cabin, not both at the same time. Kate spots the trapdoor overhead and is just like, nope. So Kevin then takes over that job.
That's
And
one of my favorite moments in the whole mission is Kate realizing someone's going to dump things on my head. And then she's like, Kevin, you'd be perfect at this.
yeah,
So funny.
she doesn't even give him a choice. She's just like, do it. I'm not doing this. So he's like, okay. And we see Dr. Will pouring in the buckets of bugs from overhead. It's really
That made
gross.
me laugh. That did make me laugh is that they actually have someone crawling up a ladder and we see them chuckling and pouring the bugs and the water in.
Yeah,
Very funny, actually.
it's wild. It's I don't it's just it's nuts. It's I like the mission. I like the escape room vibe. Find the map, find the key, figure out the switches, go into the tunnel. I don't need the bugs and the rats for me personally. I'm like, I don't need that element of it.
You
Especially
know,
the poor little rats.
yeah, the poor little rats and the poor little people who, I mean, I have to tell you, all the people who jumped ship during this mission,
Yeah.
I don't blame them for a second. I would honestly do the same thing. Bugs, sorry, no, not
Yeah.
bugs.
Yeah, not for me. I mean, I think I would put up with it, but they do have a safe word. Their safe word is haggis if they want to leave, and it costs $1,000 every time they do this. So MJ uses it first, followed by Phaedra. Down in the tunnels, CT finds a shield and gives it to basically gives it to Trishelle, sort of restoring her faith, rebuilding their friendship. Peter, there's this interesting moment because Peter and John also they witness it, like they know about it. And Peter says, right, don't tell anyone about this. Let's just keep it a secret between us. What's interesting is that I couldn't tell if Parvati was also hearing this because she was in the tunnels, but I didn't know if she was there to hear that conversation. Like I think she must have heard them saying it, but they don't. You can't really see it in the edit, so I couldn't quite figure it out.
Yeah, it was very dark in the tunnel. It's hard to tell
Yeah,
who was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, Sheree also haggises out, followed by Kate. It just says, I think I'm at haggis. I don't I don't really want to be good at this. I'm over this shit. So
Earlier, just before they start, the line that made me laugh so much is Kate says, "All missions are awful," and I was like, "I want that T-shirt."
yeah. I just want a t-shirt that says I think I'm at haggis because out of context means absolutely nothing. But if I wore it and then like some random Traitors fan saw it and they got the connection, that would be really fun for me.
Yeah.
So off they go, which means Kevin is alone trying to do this mission. It seems like CT down in the tunnels. He sees like he wants to return and help Kevin. I don't know if he actually does, but it
I think I think he runs up quickly, and then it was very chaotic at that point.
yeah, yeah,
I think he runs up quickly, and then very quickly they decide it's time to jump ship and escape.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think he came up, and then they both just went down.
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, at the end of the mission, John emerges from the tunnel first. He's got two gold coins. Well done, John. See, I do say nice things about John. Someone on Spotify wants me to stop having digs at John. I don't dig at him that much. And also, the Spotify user I said like, "Oh, is the host really conservative, and that's why you keep going on at John?" Firstly, no, I'm not conservative. Also, John was a conservative MP, so it's the wrong way around. Like, if I was like a conservative fan, I would be praising John. So no, no, that's not what's happening here. But okay, I'll say nice things about John. Also, John's not listening to this podcast. Like, I'm punching up. John is like a wealthy man. I don't think he cares what some random guy in Scotland says about him on a podcast. Okay. Anyway, John is followed by Trishelle, Peter, CT, who then goes back in for more gold after being yelled at by Trishelle, Parvati and Sandra, and then I think Kevin must make it out too. Maybe
Yes.
not in that order, like you said, Stephen. It's very chaotic. But in the end, they have $11,000 after the penalties from the four people who haggised out. Alan asks if anyone wants to admit to having found the shield. He says someone found it. Do they want to own up? No one does. Dr. Will has a pointless closing scene who he just says, I've got a lot of cleaning up to do. And again, I just thought, why was he here? And how much did they pay him to get to Scotland for a day of 20 seconds of screen time and his appearance fee, whatever that is?
Yep.
But
I mean, this is catnip for the reality fans who
yeah,
like those shows. That's why he's there.
yeah.
Um, for me, I was thinking about it this week, and I was like, well, I didn't care that Dr. Will was on because I don't know if I don't, I've never watched Big Brother. I don't know who he is. But if they had, to be fair, if they had like Christian from Project Runway, or what's his name, Marcel from Top Chef, who were iconic players of those shows, then they would have to get my attention.
Yeah.
Or what if they had one of the Queer Eye people?
Yeah. I mean,
Then I would probably be more into it because I'd be like, oh, I know these people. This is great.
I would too, but I would also still be disappointed that they weren't really used. I would sort of think, oh, you came and did a cameo and you left. I would still feel it was a bit didn't go anywhere. And I'd be like, oh, they could have made you do more than that.
Yeah,
So
there was one joke, which is Dr. Will is kind of known as a great Big Brother villain, and they had him play the villain. That was the joke,
sure.
you know.
Yeah.
So,
So we arrive back at the house. Parvati and John are having a talk. And because she says that he's the most faithful of the faithful. Again, big turnaround for John because in episode 1 or 2, he like got votes at the round table. He was nearly gone. But now everyone just knows he's probably not a traitor. She wants to get him on side. She says she wants to put on a killer performance. And I don't even think she intends the pun. She has a chat with him and pretends to cry and says that she's been masking her emotions this whole time. That's just the way she is. But people read that as her being traitorous. And she sort of says, "Oh, the past 2 years have been really difficult for me." I can't tell if John's buying it or not. I At the time I thought, oh, he's all in. He says no one has displayed such guts and character as you. So I thought, oh, this has worked. Later on, I realized, oh, it probably didn't work. Um, and he says to her that she must demonstrate she's a faithful player and won't chop off his head. I don't know how she'll demonstrate that, but hey, she's just grinning like, no, not me. I'm not a traitor. It's a really weird interaction. Uh, Kate is talking to Trishelle, John, Kevin, and CT, and she says that she's going for Parvati tonight. Trishelle then raises, Phaedra again. She says she's going for her tonight. Meanwhile, Phaedra is wandering around the house looking for people, which I think, again, if you can't find everybody, that probably means that they're somewhere talking about you. And uh, Kate is very confused about why Trishelle is throwing a wrench in the Parvati plan. That's how she phrases it.
Mhm.
Trishelle also says she doesn't want to confront Phaedra before the round table. She says Phaedra's too good at arguing. She's the smartest person here. So I think she doesn't want to give her a heads up. She wants to just surprise her tonight with all of her evidence. Of course, Phaedra then walks into the room to the most awkward silence ever.
Very
Uh,
awkward.
and now I'm sure this is all the magic of editing to make it more funny than it is. But Kate just sort of abruptly leaves, followed by a few others. And Phaedra, in her little interview clip, says there's a weird feeling going on.
She says there's a sense of paranoia,
Yes,
which, yeah, very true.
yes, there should be. So it's time for the round table. Going into the round table, we've got some interview clips. Phaedra thinks that Parvati's going tonight. Parvati, on the other hand, is gunning for Phaedra. Trishelle's worried. She says that Phaedra has three ride or dies who will not vote for her. I was trying to figure out who those three were. So I think it's Sheree, MJ, and Sandra. Are these the
Yes,
okay? Okay.
that's who I think Trishelle thinks
Yes, yeah.
are her ride or dies.
Which is funny because actually earlier in the episode, Sandra there was a moment where Sandra did consider she was like, maybe it is Phaedra. Maybe I shouldn't be going for Parvati. So Sandra, I mean, again, I don't really know who she is. I know now that she was on Survivor, so she's very clever, very tactical, very strategic. So Sandra seems like she's playing the game right because she isn't 100% trusting anyone, even the
Yeah,
people that she's friends with.
I think she's one of the best players on the game, and you can tell that she's really always considering all evidence,
Yeah,
and she's a thinker, and
yeah.
she's a strategic thinker. Um, I I have a theory that Sandra might even suspect Phaedra, but she's not going to say anything just yet. I think she's that
Mm,
kind of player. She's kind of like Jazz that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
She's
She's
thinking ahead, but not playing all of her cards.
yeah, that
It's
makes
a
sense to
feeling I
me.
get.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So Alan speaks to everybody at round table. He tells them that they have banked $114,550 at this point. Gives his little speech, gives us another Macbeth reference. He says, who looks like the innocent flower but is the serpent under it? Parvati then begins. She says, I know my name's out there. Uh, and she again she tries to defend herself like she did with John earlier. She says, "How I survive is that I become a brick wall." Like that, you all read it as being sort of cold and calculating. I'm just very defensive and self-protective. She says, "I made the wrong decision about who to trust," obviously referring to Dan. And she says, you're all reading this as being signs of, this is a sign that I'm a traitor, but I'm not. I promise I'm not. Trishelle then speaks and says she's been looking over her notes and she says she doesn't really have anything on Parvati. But for you, Phaedra, I have so much. And she turns to Phaedra and begins her list, her evidence list.
I have a note here wondering if when the show's all done, will Trishelle be publishing her famous notes
Yeah. Like yeah,
in
she'll
a
have
little
some
booklet?
merch, her
Yeah,
notebook.
exactly.
With I would I will happily buy that. They should
Yeah,
do that.
unless she burns them, because she threatens to do that quite a lot.
She does, and I'm glad she said that because I'm going to come back to that little comment she made. Yeah, I think on the last episode of the podcast we had Melissa from Traitors Canada, and Melissa said actually one of the rules, they've got lots of rules to stick to, but they were never told they couldn't make notes in their
Hmm.
hotel rooms, so they are allowed to go away and write stuff down on their own. I think they just can't show it to anyone. So yeah, I would love if the producers like compiled notes from various players, put it together in a little book and published it. I'll buy that. Uh,
Same.
so here's Trichelle's list. She says, firstly, Phaedra never acts surprised at breakfast when people arrive and they're waiting to find out who's been murdered. Phaedra just doesn't ever really seem that bothered about it. And Phaedra retorts by saying, "Well, I'm not frantic like you," which made me laugh. Secondly, Trishelle says, "Well, Dan turned on you, and Dan's really smart." And I thought, well, not in this game, he wasn't. And Trishelle's asking, why would he do that? Why would he land your name in it on that night that he knew he was going to get banished? There's something in that. John then jumps in here and he says, yeah, why would Dan lie at the last minute when he knew he was about to be banished? Phaedra, I think, sort of cleverly defends this. And she says, well, because he was still protecting the traitors. He wasn't turning on a traitor. He was
Hmm.
protecting the remit. So she's like, no, he picked me because he knows I'm a faithful, um, which is a fair defense. Uh, and Kate then jumps in at this point as well. And I think she's trying to protect Phaedra, although I couldn't quite follow what she was saying. Kate says last year when I was in this first season and I played the game, just banishing the person who the last banished traitor voted for wouldn't have worked. I think that's what Kate's saying, but
Yes.
maybe she's saying the opposite. I think she
No,
was
I think
defending
that's
Phaedra.
exactly what Kate was saying.
Okay,
And it seemed to me she was trying to defend Phaedra.
okay,
Because I mean, Kate's thing at this point, as we'll find out soon, is she's just so annoyed. Like, why have we jumped tracks?
yeah, yeah,
Why aren't we sticking with the Parvati track? Why are we over here now? So I
yeah.
think she's trying to get her word in, about that too.
Okay. Uh, Trichelle's last sort of item is that, well, Kevin and Trichelle kind of say this together. Actually, Kevin jumps in and he says, Phaedra, I've noticed you have this nervous twitch. And Trichelle saying, yes, yes. She mentioned this earlier in the episode too. Of course, Phaedra's just like, what are you talking about? No one has ever said this to me. It's ridiculous. And John then comes in with one of his John little speeches and says, I
Classic.
he says, I have a thought. Parvati, and he's clearly prepared this, right? Parvati may well be a duchess of deception and a mistress of murder. And the thing is, there's lots of reaction shots of people like, what? Like shocked. And I'm like, this isn't really shocking. You all think it's Parvati anyway. Like, don't act surprised. And John
It is a
says,
good turn of phrase, though.
it's
Like
good
I
fun.
really like. I think when this roundtable started, the note that I wrote down is they all look so tired right now, probably after the cabin. But
Yeah.
I think they all started really perking up when he was talking. It's
Yeah.
great. It's a rousing speech.
Yeah.
It's very like he's really showing his political chops right now. Like time for a rousing speech.
Exactly. And John was not just an MP, but he was Speaker of the House in the House of Commons. So
Yes.
that's that's how I'm most familiar with John, is just actually seeing him in the news in the House of Commons, like, calling the House to order and stuff like that. So he's obviously a very charismatic speaker, and this is his thing. He knows how to get an audience's attention. Uh, so it's good fun. He says to Parvati, "You were clearly Dan's accomplice," and says that she's always been very serene about the threat of murder, which is funny because it's kind of similar to what Phaedra's being accused of not being nervous or anxious enough. And he points out something very interesting, that at the sacrifice ritual, as he's calling it last week, the fire ceremony in the woods, she was the only one who didn't really plead for her life. And he says, I think it's because you knew you didn't need to. So you didn't really look that desperate. Um, Parvati then tries to defend herself. She thinks she's just been kept around because the traitors know that she's a prime target, so that's why she isn't being murdered. And so that made her not worry about being murdered because she thought, yeah, the traitors are going to keep me here as long as they can. Peter then jumps in. He agrees that Phaedra hasn't really ever been nervous like a faithful. And yes, also he thinks that Dan was landing her in it before he left. And here's where Kate speaks up, like you said, Stephen. She's like, how come yesterday everyone was so keen on Parvati? Did those reasons just evaporate? So she's right, but she's also just not picking up on. She's kind of a step behind, I guess. The others have figured out that Phaedra is a traitor, and Kate's just not quite there yet. Peter then says, "Well, I had a conversation with Parvati today, and that changed my mind." And Phaedra's like, "Yeah, there's a backdoor deal going on," and she reveals this conversation they had in the previous episode, which you referenced, Stephen. She says, Peter came to me and Parvati and tried to get us in on some secret deal, and I dismissed myself. I didn't want any part of that. And they debate, Peter, Kate, Parvati sort of debate back and forth about this shift of opinion on Peter's behalf, and lots of them.
I think
CT,
this is a I think this is a could be a key moment. We'll see. My prediction is this is a key moment in anticipation of Peter's downfall.
yeah,
That he could potentially be banished from the castle for this because of that conversation that he had in the armory with Parvati and Phaedra.
mm,
And his sort of defense of it at the round table right now in this scene is so lame. He just can't, it's just like he can't really defend it. And everybody's just got the eye on him now, as we
mm,
will see.
yeah, I,
Everybody looked really confused and they're kind of like, what is he going on about?
yeah,
So the chickens could come home to roost for him on this one.
mhm. I,
That's my guess.
I think you're right. I think Peter is sort of one of the, I want to use the word standouts of the season, not because I think he's outstanding, but I mean he's had the most screen time, the most sort of storyline. I'm very interested to see what is going to happen next week. Like I really want to know. Yeah, I want to know how long it's going to last. Either
Yeah.
is he going to be banished, or will the traitors eventually just get rid of him? And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I have a feeling he's actually going to get himself banished at
I
some
think
point.
so too. Yeah.
So, right before the vote, CT admits that just he has no idea what's going on. He's utterly confused. And there are various other people that we just don't really hear anything from in the edit at the round table. So it's time to vote. We hear Kate saying she reckons the result of this vote could actually change the outcome of the whole game. Here we go. MJ is first. MJ votes for Parvati. In the tiniest handwriting I've ever seen, by the way, like on this, it's like this tiny, tiny writing. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I would love a psychologist spin-off, or like I've said this before, but on Big Brother UK back in the early years, like 20 years ago, actually they would have a show on like one of the weekend shows. They would have psychologists comment on the behavior of the players. I would love a psychologist to do that and analyze everybody's handwriting on their slates and what it says about it. Phaedra's next. She votes for Parvati, as does Sandra. Then it's Peter to vote, and he votes for Phaedra. John then votes for Parvati. Parvati, Kevin, Trishelle all vote for Phaedra. Sheree votes for Parvati. So at this point, it's very, very almost evenly split. We have 5 votes for Parvati, 4 for Phaedra. I think it's not that common that the vote is split between two actual traitors. Quite often it's between two completely wrong people and they're faithful, or a faithful and a traitor. But it's interesting they've all pegged the two remaining traitors,
Yep.
and it's so close between them. Alan tells us that if there is one more vote for Parvati, she will be banished. And CT is next to vote, and he does vote for Parvati. followed by Kate, who does the same. So it's
We got another T-shirt line. CT says, "I'm looking for traitors, not love."
yes,
Just
yes.
so many T-shirt lines in the show.
yeah. Parvati then, she's been banished. She has to stand in the circle of truth. And as she sort of gets up to go and stand there, Trishelle whispers to Kevin and says she's a traitor, which I thought was interesting that she chose to say that. Well, maybe we'll talk more about that. So Parvati has her speech. She says, I've spent the last 2 years of my life practicing truth telling and emotional authenticity. Says another couple of things along those lines and says, I was coming out when I was coming out here, I wanted to play a faithful game, but I'm not a faithful, I'm a traitor. And off she goes. Kate says that was a good speech. And this is where Trishelle says something that you referenced earlier. She says, all right, I'm burning my notebook. I think she said that for the benefit of Phaedra. I think
Agreed.
Trishelle still thinks Phaedra's a traitor. She just doesn't want to be murdered. so
Right.
she's like, oh shit, Phaedra's still here. I'd better make her now think that I was all wrong. I'm not going to go for Phaedra anymore. So that's what I think was happening.
I agree. And also, of course, it's a double bluff because Trishelle has a shield.
Yeah, and can't be. Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
so tonight she can't be murdered. But yes, I agree.
Yeah. Uh, yes, it's that. Well, of course, what ends up happening is that the shield will be useless because
Correct.
unless they let her carry over to next episode.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I can't. That's never happened before.
No, I don't think so. At the round table, Phaedra's then really upset. I think Sandra maybe gives her a hug. And Sandra says in her interview that she's sad to see Parvati gone despite their differences. And she says, I'm going to be the queen of this castle and I'm going to win the traitors. And she may well do that. Uh,
Yep.
so Phaedra is now the lone traitor, which means, we're not at the end of the episode, but surely as a viewer, we know recruitment is probably on the way. We get some discussions around the house. We time to debrief. Kevin is talking to MJ and says, I really don't get why Peter suddenly shifted from Parvati. What's going on? Don't know if I trust him. Sandra and Phaedra are basically having the same conversation elsewhere. Peter takes Kate to the kitchen for a little private chat, and he says, "Look, I was playing a game with Parvati, and Kate's not happy. Kate says, you're lying to the faithful. That's a bad move for a faithful." And she says, I'm not saying Phaedra's not a traitor. I'm saying you were doing shady shit, which
Yep.
is very accurate.
Completely true.
So Peter is realizing that his plan is beginning to crumble. Um, of course,
But the thing is with Kate, Kate does not suffer fools.
yeah, no,
Peter is behaving, I'm not saying he is one, but he's behaving foolishly by creating levels of smoke where there's no fire.
yeah,
He just doesn't need to. And she's like, this is ridiculous. And so I think she sees him as a block at this point in time in the evening, as we will see, to the faithful successfully winning the game. So she's kind of like, she's just ready to dismiss him
yeah,
because, yeah.
yeah. Of course, when Peter's saying, "Oh, my plan's beginning to crumble," he doesn't realize he doesn't need to worry about murder, at least for tonight, because the faithful, they don't know how many tracers there are, so they won't realize there's only one left now, and that there's probably not going to be a murder. So they all still think they're at risk tonight.
Yeah. I think what MJ said to Kevin a little earlier was right on the money is that MJ said, I'm going to have a chat with Peter and tell him, cowboy, pace yourself.
Yeah, yeah,
Enough with the planning.
yeah, yeah. It's time for Traitor's Tower then, and of course, it's just Phaedra alone. I don't think Phaedra. We've seen this in previous episodes. I don't think Phaedra has really read all the rules to the game, so I don't think she realizes that she'll probably be forced to recruit tonight. Alan arrives and explains you're going to offer someone an ultimatum in the dungeon. So You'll give someone the offer of recruitment, and if they don't take it, they will be murdered. And Alan asks, who would you like to recruit? And Phaedra, but seemingly without much thought, says Kate in a very devious voice. She says that Kate is a kindred spirit. She's very direct. She'll do things that I can't. And I think Kate understands the game. Because, well, Kate has played it before. She was here last season. And so we cut to Kate arriving to the dungeon, just proceeding to give comedy gold, calls it a shithole, asks Fergus for some champagne. Of course,
He
Fergus.
wonders what she did wrong to get put down there.
Yeah, yeah, she has no idea what's going on because this wasn't an element of her season. Uh, Fergus doesn't speak. He proceeds to lock her in, and episode 8 ends with Kate just calling out Fergus. I have some overall questions, Stephen, to put to you.
Yeah,
Firstly, Kate's going to accept, right? She's
of
she's not
course.
she's not going to do a Peter,
I
is
don't think
she?
so. I
Okay,
mean, if she did, I would be gobsmacked if she did.
yeah.
Because she's the one earlier in this episode during breakfast. Kate says, I would throw any one of them in the moat for $10. She's ready. She's ready to be a traitor. So I think she'll accept.
Yeah. I mean, unless she does just like, I have made my appearance fee. They're gonna pay me no matter what. I'm just gonna go home now. I I mean, after Peter's refusal, nothing would surprise me in a way, but I if I had to bet money, I'm gonna bet that she's gonna accept. She's gonna become a traitor.
I
Uh,
really hope she does. I want her to.
I think it's gonna be fun to watch. I'm so excited to see how she behaves.
Agreed.
My next question, actually, we've already answered, I reckon. I wanted to just ask, is Peter playing a bad game?
He at one time earlier in the season, I thought he was playing a very good game, and now I think he has. Um, well, it's like MJ says. He hasn't been able to pace himself. He's doing too much. He's trying too hard, and it's um, now he's playing a bad game. It's not working. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. And we're two-thirds in now, right? Assuming there are 12 episodes, I'm sure there are. I think we can start to make practical, more realistic predictions about where things are going. So I'm putting you on the spot here a bit, Stephen. Who You don't have to name all of the. Who do you think is making it to the finale? Who's going to be there in that final episode?
If Kate accepts and becomes a traitor, let's see, so 9, 10, 11, 12. I could easily see Trishelle getting murdered. I'm going to just name names. Trishelle getting murdered, Phaedra getting banished, Peter getting banished, not necessarily all in this order, Kevin getting murdered, and the final group is basically Kate the traitor and what I'm going to call the Bravo girls.
Okay.
Where Kate is the end game is her trying to slide under the radar as the last remaining traitor and win the game. That to me would be entertainment gold.
Okay. So, and my next question was, do you think this season is going to be a faithful or a traitor win? So, do you think Kate could pull off?
That I'm not sure, and it's mainly because of the. It's going to be a nail biter. She might pull it off, but Sandra is wicked smart.
Yeah. That's my predictions about who's making it to the finale are Sandra, unless the traitors become wise to her and and realize she's too smart and they just murder her. which could happen. So I think Sandra, but I think she's playing it pretty low key. So I think she's sort of under the radar right now. I think Sandra's making it to the finale, possibly Kate as well, assuming that she accepts the offer. I think CT will make it to the end because he hasn't got a clue what's going on and seems quite pliable. So I think the traitors will always assume that they can sort of bend him to their will. Maybe,
John?
oh, well, John, unless John is murdered because he's so obviously not a traitor now to everybody, so they think he's not going to get banished. Let's get rid of him. I think Kevin might make it to the end as well, and I reckon the faithful will win this season. I think it's a faithful victory because I think if Sandra's still around, she's gonna put she's won. I think she's won Survivor twice. She's
Yeah.
strategic. She's clever. She's done her homework, and I think she gets the game. So I reckon she's gonna lead the faithful to a win. I don't think Phaedra's gonna last much longer as a traitor, and I don't think Kate is invested enough or tactical enough to make it work as a traitor to all the
And
way to the
that's
end.
why, yeah, I mean, that's why you could be right. She might turn it down and just let herself be murdered and go, I don't give a fuck. You know, that's classic Kate. But if that happens, then Phaedra is in deep doo doo. She
Yeah,
won't, she won't have, she'll have murdered someone, but she's going to have to try to recruit again.
yeah. It's
Episode nine.
and that's also interesting. If if by some wild chance, yeah, Kate just says, "Nah, I'm going home." Bye, and we're left with Phaedra alone. I don't know how production works that out. So, I mean, because what could happen is that Phaedra gets banished next episode, and there are no
Yes.
traitors left. Now they could just let the game play out. I don't think they'll ever do that. I think if that was to happen, Alan Cumming would just step in like he did in episode one. I think he would just choose another traitor. I think he just pick somebody. They would have to concoct some way to get some. I don't think they will ever
Yeah.
have a season where there are just no traitors left in the last
Yeah.
couple of
They'd have to
episodes.
invent a new rule that we haven't seen yet
Yeah,
to to
to
let that
initiate
play
someone.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So we will see where it goes for the next few episodes. It's time for us, Stephen, to conclude our banishment because we have been playing the Trader Traitor. We have been, I think, have been lying to one another or have lied at some point throughout this episode. I have lied to you, Stephen, I must confess. Did you lie to me?
I must confess, I did.
Okay. I have almost no idea what you lied about. I have one thing, and it's a pathetic guess, but
Go for
and
it.
I'm just gonna have to go for it because I didn't write anything else you said that I thought was a lie. Unless you might have said something about the post-mortem, and I haven't watched that, so you could be pulling a David on me, and I would have no idea if it was a lie or not.
I faithfully swear I did not lie about anything in the postmortem.
Okay, in that case, right? Well, this probably rules this out. You you said that some of the players, some of the women, like called themselves the Bravo girls, and I thought maybe you just made that up and no one said that. Is that your line?
No, nope, because that's something that Kate says in the postmortem.
Okay.
She calls them the Bravo girls, so that's why I used.
Yeah, I thought as much. And well, then I'm out. You're gonna have to tell me, Stephen.
Yeah, Matthew, I just slipped it in toward the beginning when Phaedra is at breakfast, and
Oh,
what I said was I said that she said she wanted cream cheese and jam. What she says is, I want cream cheese and preserves.
oh, it crossed my mind briefly, but then I thought, no, she's talked about food a few times at breakfast, so this feels true. So I just ignored it. Well, you got me. You got me good. Well done. Any idea what I lied about?
The only thing that crossed my mind was when you were describing the sacrifice ritual, as John calls it,
Hmm.
you mentioned the name of the players who were not safe. And I think you mentioned four of them, but not five of them. I don't think you said the name Parvati. And I wasn't sure if you were leaving her out as a lie or because, she was a traitor, so it didn't count. That's my guess.
Okay. I was just leaving her out because she was a traitor and it didn't count. So I just didn't think I needed to mention her. So it wasn't a deliberate lie. Uh, my lie, funnily enough, was we must have lied to one another within the space of 10 seconds because I lied at like the exact same moment as you did. And my lie was also about Phaedra. I described her outfit at breakfast and I said she was wearing a beret, a tartan tie, and a little sparkly brooch. And she was not wearing a little sparkly brooch. I added that detail
Awesome.
in.
Uh, I love it. And what's so funny is that it was, in fact, Alan who wore the sparkly brooch in this episode because he had that crazy golden brooch with the green stone in the middle that was holding his little Afghan
Yeah,
blanket up.
yeah.
So well done. Where are our applications? We should be applying for the traders right now.
Yeah. Well, we're good traitors, but we're not good faithfuls because we didn't detect the lies. But that's okay. We're good at lying. And
It's
anyway,
not,
it's
it's
you
not the role I want in the traders. I want to be a trader. So
yeah. And if you're a faithful who can't detect lies, actually you're probably quite safe because you're not going to get murdered. So that's not too
there you
bad.
go.
Although you do have to figure it out at the very end. So, before we go, listeners, as always, if you are listening on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Castbox, whatever app you use, it would be really amazing if you could leave a little review or a comment, or just make sure that you subscribe and follow. If you've got any questions or thoughts on the episodes, send them my way. There is lots of discussion going on the YouTube page right now, especially for Traitors Australia. And if you're in the US, within a few weeks, you will be able to watch that and you can join in all the YouTube chat. For everyone who's leaving comments on YouTube, thank you so much. I can't reply to all of them individually because it would take too long, but I do read them all. And it's really, really cool to see everyone getting into discussions. You can follow the podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at the Trader Podcast, or on X at the Trader Pod. And I've just remembered something I forgot to say about YouTube. We This is a comment that Michael, who's a very faithful listener, Michael left. I think in the last episode of the podcast, I was talking about the silver bars, and we were wondering why in Australia do they use silver bars? And someone had said, "Oh, it's a nod to Dutch traitors, the original Virgin. They had silver bars." But then
Hmm.
my follow-up question was, "Why did they have silver bars?" And Michael pointed out what actually should be very obvious. There's a sort of metaphorical reason. Stephen, do you have any idea why there are silver bars?
Not a Scooby Doo.
Well, I'm saying obvious. It seemed, in retrospect, it seems obvious. Michael suggested that they did say this at some point in one of the shows. It's a sort of Judas reference, 20 silver pieces to betray Jesus. It's the idea of,
Ah, that's so
yeah,
clever.
betrayal, silver pieces, biblical. So they use silver bars as a reward for being a good traitor or faithful. So that makes sort of yes metaphorical, meaningful sense to use silver. So I like that idea.
Cool.
Uh, there we go. It's all answered now. Unless someone else will now be like, no, there's another reason, and you just haven't
This
realized.
is actually the official currency of Denmark.
Exactly. They used to use silver bars back in 1024. Anyway, you can also send me questions about silver bars or anything by emailing me at the podcast at gmail.com. And if you wanted to chip in to help me buy my $25 streaming ticket to watch Alan's um conversation streaming thing in New York, you could donate at coffee.com. That's ko-fi.com/Matthew Keeley. And there are other costs involved in distributing the podcast and using all the editing software and all that stuff. So it's helpful if people want to put in a little donation. You don't have to. If you're listening and subscribing, that's just as rewarding too. So thank you. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed talking about episode 8 with me.
I did indeed. Thanks for having me on. It's always a real pleasure to be on the podcast with you, Matthew.
Oh,
Um, thanks so much.
no, thank you so much. And hopefully you will be back again sometime soon for some future version of the Traitors somewhere. It's always good to have your input.
I'm always happy to be a correspondent when you need me. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And until next time, keep us on your trader.